Subversive Preacher. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a reflection, a sermon of sorts, for the third Sunday of Advent. And the text is Isaiah 61, 1 through 4, and 8 through 11. Too long to read to you right now, but I'll post it with the text of this sermon on my website, subversivepreacher.org. And this is a prophetic poem from Isaiah, and it is to Christianity what I Want to Hold Your Hand is to the Beatles. And here's what I mean. This poem is the frame in which the survivors of the events around Jesus' execution hung the meaning of his life. To explain what I mean, I will lean on the Gospel of Luke, which tells us a story that demonstrates the importance of Isaiah's prophetic vision. You may remember this story from Luke. After Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, and he sojourns in the wilderness and struggles with his own demons, and after he emerges from the wilderness with a powerful sense of his own calling, he goes home to Nazareth, to the synagogue where he grew up. And the story says that at the synagogue on Sabbath, someone hands Jesus a scroll of scripture to read. And it's Isaiah, the exact text that I'm talking about, 61. Now, the custom of the synagogue in those days, people stood up to read and they sat down to preach. So that's what Jesus did. He read Isaiah and then he sat down and he preached. We don't have the text of that sermon, but he must have preached pretty well because they described his words as gracious. And clearly that poem from Isaiah 61 could be heard as comforting on one kind of level. If we were the folks who have been in exile, oppressed, bound up, and heartbroken, Isaiah's poem sounds a note of comfort and of hope. But if we were the captors, the oppressors, the purveyors of injustice, fat and sassy, then Isaiah's poem sounds like a reversal of fortunes. What happened in the synagogue that day is that the longer Jesus spoke, the more his point seeped in and the congregation started getting angry. They got so angry that they grabbed him. As Luke tells the story, Jesus is overtaken by an angry mob who manhandles him. It isn't clear from Luke's story, but whatever Jesus said about Isaiah 61, the congregation was so angry that they took him to the edge of town, encased in an angry mob like a mosquito in amber. At the edge of town, the mob sort of undulated toward the edge of a cliff with the group mentality to throw him over the abyss. And just as they were to heave ho, there was no Jesus. He had slithered away unnoticed while the mob was focused on their anger. So this poem from Isaiah comes back again and again and again in the music and in the hymns of Christmas as well as Easter. And it comes back in the lectionary and the readings from Advent and Christmas. And it comes back everywhere throughout the thousands of years of Christian history, not to mention its prominence in the history of Israel and Jewish thought. It is an example of how words have power. And it's an example of how the prophetic word in particular has power, is powerful. The prophetic word, if you can believe it, originates in some strange and mystical way with God. The prophetic word is given birth as though the prophet's mouth was a cervix opening for an escaping holiness. The prophetic word does not predict the future, but rather it contains a vision, a vision of how the world could be, perhaps will be. Words have power. Words have power. Power is exercising the ability to influence change, create change, midwife change, assist change, or resist change. Power is exercised in our ability to influence change. Now, the world as we know it is always changing, and we can be co-creators with God and assist with those changes taking place, or we can resist be change resistant and use our resources to restrain change. Each one of us is always engaged in creating change or restraining change, often at one and the same time in a variety of contexts. Whether we welcome it or curse it, the important question is how we're using our power to influence change. Our words have power, even mystical power. We can actually change the way that we think and the way that we behave and how the world around us works by the words we use. Now, I understand that anybody listening to me who operates with the part of their brain that functions by reason will not believe that words have that kind of power, because reason-bound people will not ascribe power, the ability to influence change, to things they cannot see. Nevertheless, words do have power, and they have incredible power if those words are authored by God. It may not be direct and explosive power in the moment, or even visible in a new way in the moment, but like an underground or an atmospheric river, the power of the prophetic word moves in, around, and under and above us. For example, if you're an active alcoholic and you simply start saying to yourself out loud and to other people, "I'm an alcoholic," something would begin to change. Or if you live with an alcoholic and you began to acknowledge out loud the behavior that you observe that is self-destructive, then something would begin to change, either with you or the alcoholic, or both. Or this: I guarantee you that if your first reaction to any new idea or suggestion is always no, or I can't, or we shouldn't, that nothing much will happen, except that you will become increasingly tired, sore, sick, and wounded from trying to hold back the universe. The words we choose to use or choose not to use actually influence who we are and the world around us. Words, simple words, have the power to influence change. I think we can all acknowledge that truth has power, which is why we're so cautious about telling it. And it's also the reason behind why the political strategy is to make the truth seem so difficult to decipher. It's because truth unleashes forces beyond our control, and we know from experience that we can get swept up in tumultuous change by becoming truth tellers. Look at any corner of the world, and in the places where the truth about justice and freedom have been most successfully silenced, that's where some of the greatest human horrors take place. And likewise, it is where truth is bursting out from behind restraining forces against change that so much hope is found. Words have power. The words may be have to be repeated like a mantra for 50 years, like in South Africa. But if God is the author, the words will give birth. And the shadow is also true, where those words are not uttered, where fear keeps people in silence and denial. When change toward justice and peace is resisted, God will lie fallow. It is symbolic of our lunacy that we believe missiles and tanks and guns are the most powerful resources for creating justice and freedom. Words have even greater power. The most powerful words are those contained in a prophetic vision. Once the prophetic word has been uttered, it will sooner or later come to pass. Now, I know that's a preposterous claim, but I'm going to make it anyway. There is no doubt that Isaiah's vision of a new heaven and a new earth is in the process of coming to pass. There's no doubt that Jesus' claim that the kingdom of God is breaking into the world here and now is in fact cracking us open. There's no doubt that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation is the same river-moving history 105 years later as Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream prophecy. And there's no doubt that they are both coming true, and that 105 years from now, those who follow us will see the same river moving through them. There's no doubt that Harriet Tubman and Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth, Mahatma Gandhi and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Rosa Parks, Jonathan Daniels, Oscar Romero, Nelson Mandela, and Malala are but a chant on the lips of God. A chant that is cracking us open, breaking us down, building us up, and sculpting a new creation. There is no doubt that their words have power, and no doubt that God was the author of their prophetic words. Words have power. Now, here's a belief, I would say, that the truth that lives on the evidence of, it's a belief that I believe lives on the evidence of history for those with eyes and ears to see and hear. And it's this, that once the prophetic truth is, the prophetic word is spoken, history is changed by it. As I said, our thinking has been drenched and overly marinated in the notion of pure reason. We have been deformed in ways by the Enlightenment philosophers who trained us to believe that only pure reason and science, or data as we say today, defines the world. But the biblical view, and perhaps the poetic view, understands that God has moved through the mouth of the prophet like an infant pushes through the cervix. And the prophetic words, the prophetic poets, biblical and otherwise, understand that if God is the author of the vision, then sooner or later it happens. Slowly but surely the prophetic word gets under our skins and subverts our self-centered loyalty to economic and political order. The prophetic word, even within the language of worship, will change our hearts and minds over time because they're powerful words. We walk into spiritual communities, into church, as functional atheists who do not believe that God does anything in our world, anything big or powerful. Many of us do not believe that God is actively present in our world, struggling on behalf of those who are battered by forces of human evil. Many of us do not believe God suffers at the hands of those who use the power to hurt and restrain change. Many of us do not believe that God suffers. Many of us believe instead in a world etched and sketched and painted by Disney and Dostoevsky and the Physician's Desk reference more than by Isaiah and Jesus. The words we allow ourselves to use have power, the power to change us and to open our eyes to what we do not currently see. Part of our task of any community of faith is healing us enough that we can risk the use of prophetic words, the words that will change us in ways that we cannot predict and perhaps that we're afraid to imagine. To risk the prophetic words and try on a prophetic imagination so that we can begin to see what we could not see even just a moment before we tried it on. So-called virtual reality, the digital magic we can buy and wear over our eyes, does not have a vision. It does not even reveal reality. But putting on prophetic imagination, by changing the words we use, will give us vision and reveal a new reality. The words we use have power. And I hope that my words now, wishing you the peace of God to be always with you, are powerful.